Continuing with rule number 11 from Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life. This section of rule number 11, which is entitled Don't Bother Children While They're Skateboarding. I say it like that because there's a popular music track. You can find it on YouTube. Just type in Don't Bother Kids While They're Skateboarding and Jordan Peterson, JBP music. The patriarchy, help or hindrance. Of course, culture is an oppressive structure. It's always been that way. It's a fundamental, universal, essential reality. The tyrannical king is a symbolic truth, an archetypal constant. What we inherit from the past is willfully blind and out of date. It's a ghost, a machine, and a monster. It must be rescued, repaired, and kept at bay by the attention and effort of the living. It crushes as it hammers us into socially acceptable shape, and it wastes great potential, but it offers great gain too. Every word we speak is a gift from our ancestors. Every thought we think was thought previously by someone smarter. The highly functional infrastructure that surrounds us, particularly the West, is a gift from our ancestors. The comparatively uncorrupt political and economic systems, the technology, the wealth, the lifespan, the freedom, the luxury, and the opportunity. Culture takes with one hand, but in some fortunate places it gives more with the other. To think about culture only as oppressive is ignorant and ungrateful as well as dangerous. This is not to say, as I am hoping in the content of the book has made abundantly clear so far, that culture should not be subject to criticism. Consider this as well. In regard to oppression, any hierarchy creates winners and losers. The winners are, of course, more likely to justify the hierarchy and the losers to criticize it. But, number one, the collective pursuit of any valued goal produces a hierarchy, as some will be better and some at worse as the pursuit not matter what it is. And number two, it is the pursuit of goals that in large part lends life its sustaining meaning. We experience almost all the emotions that make life deep and engaging as a consequence of moving successfully towards something deeply desired and valued. The price we pay for that involvement is the inevitable creation of hierarchies of success, while the inevitable consequence is difference in outcome. Absolute equality would therefore require the sacrifice of value itself, and then there would be nothing worth living for. We might instead note with gratitude that a complex, sophisticated culture allows for many games and many successful players, and that a well-structured culture allows the individuals that compose it to play and to win in many different fashions. Kind of like with me, even this YouTube channel, I'm reading because people have always told me I'm a really great reader. It's one particular skill that I have as a really great advantage, and I'm trying to share that with the world. So help this channel grow. Click the thumbs up, and if you haven't already, hit the subscribe button. It's not going to hurt you. It is also perverse to consider culture the creation of men. Culture is symbolically, archetypically, mythically male. That's partly why the idea of the patriarchy is so easily swallowed. But it is certainly the creation of humankind, not the creation of men, let alone white men who nonetheless contributed their fair share. European culture has only been dominant to the degree that it is dominant at all for about 400 years. On the timescale of cultural evolution, which is to be measured at a minimum in thousands of years, such a time span barely registers. Furthermore, even if women contributed nothing substantial to art, literature, and the sciences prior to the 1960s and the feminist revolution, which is not something I believe, then the role they played raising children and working on the farms was still instrumental in raising boys and freeing up men, a very few men, so that humanity could propagate itself and strive forward. Here's an alternative theory. Throughout history, men and women both struggled terribly for freedom from the overwhelming horrors of privation and necessity. Women were often at a disadvantage during that struggle, as they had all the vulnerabilities of men with the extra reproductive burden and less physical strength. In addition to the filth, misery, disease, starvation, cruelty, and ignorance that characterized the lives of both sexes, back before the 20th century, when even people in the Western world would typically existed on less than $1 a day in today's money, women also had to put up with the serious practical inconvenience of menstruation, the high probability of unwanted pregnancy, the chance of death or serious damage during childbirth, and the burden of too many young children. Perhaps that is a sufficient reason for the different legal and practical treatments of men and women that characterized most societies prior to the recent technological revolutions. including the invention of birth control. At least such things might be taken into account before the assumption that men tyrannize women into accepted as truism. It looks to me like the so-called oppression of the patriarchy was instead an imperfect collective attempt by men and women stretching over millennia to free each other from privation, disease, and drudgery. The recent case of Arunchalam Maroon Khan provides a solitary example. This man, the tampon king of India, became unhappy because his wife had to use dirty rags during her menstrual period. She told him it was either expensive sanitary napkins or milk for the family. He spent the next 14 years in a state of insanity by his neighbor's judgment, trying to rectify the problem. Even his wife and mother abandoned him briefly, terrified as they became of his obsession. When he ran out of female volunteers to test his product, he took to wearing a bladder of pig's blood as a replacement. I can see now how this behavior would have improved his popularity. I can't see how this behavior would have improved his popularity or status. Now his low-cost and locally made napkins are distributed across India, manufactured by women-run self-help groups. His users have been provided with freedom they never previously experienced. In 2014, this high school dropout was named one of Time magazine's 100 most influential people in the world. I am unwilling to consider personal gain. Uh, he's Morgaton's primary motivation. Is he part of the patriarchy? In 1847, James Young's system used ether to help a woman who had a deformed pelvis giving birth. Afterwards, he switched to the better performing chloroform. The first baby delivered under its influence was named anesthesia. By 1853, chloroform was esteemed enough to be used by Queen Victoria, who delivered her seventh baby under its influence. Remarkably, soon after form, the option of painless childbirth was available everywhere. A few people warned of the dangers of opposing God's pronouncement to women in Genesis chapter 3 verse 16. I will greatly multiply thy sorrow and thy conception. In sorrow thou shalt bring forth children. Some also opposed its use among males. Young, healthy, courageous men simply did not need anesthesia. Such opposition was ineffectual. Use of anesthesia spread with extreme rapidity and far faster than would be possible today. Even prominent churchmen supported its use. The first practical tampon, Tampax, didn't arrive until the 1930s. It was invented by Dr. Earl Cleveland Haas. He made it of compressed cotton and designed an applicator from paper tubes. This helped lessen the resistance to the product by those who objected to the self-touching that might otherwise occur. By the early 1940s, 25% of women were using them. 30 years later, it was 70%. Now it's 4 out of 5, with the remainder relying on pads, which are now hyper-absorbent and held in places by effective adhesives, opposed to the awkwardly placed, bulky, belted, diaper-like sanitary napkins of the 1970s. Did Marthugian, Simpson, and Haas oppress women or free them? What about Gregory Goodwin Pincus, who invented the birth control pill? In what manner were these practical, enlightened, persistent men part of the constricting patriarchy? Why do we teach our young people that our incredible culture is the result of male oppression? Blinded by this central assumption, disciplines as diverse as education, social work, art history, gender studies, literature, sociology, and, increasingly, law activity treat men as oppressors and men activities as inherently destructive. Yeah, I totally agree. And, I can say that from a perspective of a white male going through, like, one of the top university systems. It was like, I always saw everything as tabula rasa, clean slate, but, like instantly people go, oh, white male, like, instantly. It's just like, what? They also often directly promote radical political action, radical by all the norms of the societies within which they are situated, which they do not distinguish from education. The Pauline Jewett Institute of Women and Gender Studies at Ottawa's Carleton University, for example, encourages activism as part of their mandate. The Gender Studies Department at Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario, teaches feminist, anti-racist, and queer theories and methods that center activism for social change, indicating support for the supposition that university education should above all foster political engagement of a particular kind. That was from Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life. That was from rule number 11, don't bother kids while they're skateboarding. He actually got into his different political ideologies, which I totally agree with 100%, if you're wondering. My name is Gregory Brand. I'm a writer. Thank you for watching, and Tuesday.